Welcome to the Executive Fire Officer Development video series. Today's lesson will be on the Emergency Response Capabilities Reporting Tool. What is it and how do I use it? The Fire Emergency Services training lifecycle is comprehensive and provides our firefighters the technical knowledge, skills, and abilities to execute the mission at the tactical, operational, and some strategic levels. However, the training does not specifically address succession training in terms of executive administrative tasks for our mid-level fire officers. The purpose of this lesson is to provide up-and-coming executive fire officers the knowledge, skills, and abilities to understand and learn how to enter data into the ERC. To facilitate learning, this lesson will follow these steps. Step 1. Understand the history of the ERC. Step 2. Understand why the Fire Emergency Services has an ERC. Step 3. Understand what the ERC is for. Step 4. Understand the ERC's interface and know how to navigate it. And our last step, Step 5. Understand how to populate the ERC with data. Before we begin, I'd like to add that this lesson is also an excellent tool for seasoned fire officers to keep their skills proficient with the ERC. In addition, this lesson is a starting point for our civilian populace who would like to know how the Fire Emergency Services strives for resource stewardship. Hello, my name is Senior Master Sergeant Lloyd Stinson, and I am the Flight Superintendent at Nellis Creek Fire Department located in sunny Las Vegas, Nevada, home of the Air Force Thunderbirds. For this segment, I'll be your narrator for only a few minutes, but actual time learning and populating the data will vary on experience and the organization of one's source data. Besides the initial data load, a well-organized individual can populate, validate, proof, and finalize the ERC well under 30 minutes. Let's first begin with some disclosure statements. First, when the ERC is unpopulated with data, there is no classification placed against it. However, once the data is entered into the ERC, it becomes classified as for official use only. Therefore, all data entered in this video is fictitious data and for example only. Caution: computer work does have health hazards. Some of the chronic symptoms include musculoskeletal problems, repetitive stress injuries, vision problems, headaches, and stress disorders. The best way to avoid these symptoms is to maintain a good, consistent ergonomical posture. The amount of tools needed for this task are relatively small. You'll need a Windows-based operating system, and the system will need to be running either Windows 7 or 8. In addition, your system will need to be able to run the Windows Office package to include Excel. Your last tool is the ERC reporting tool, in which you will have to have access to the ERC version 2.15.1. Some other optional items are the computer mouse and a cup of coffee. No, I said cup of coffee. There we go. The skill and experience level needed for ERC task accomplishment is twofold. First, to complete data entry and submittal task only requires an individual to have basic skills and experience to understand how a computer works and how to work an Excel spreadsheet. However, understanding the source data for the ERC takes comprehensive skill and experience in order to learn and have a widespread understanding of the career field's instructions and source documents. Therefore, entering data is easy, but understanding whether that information is current from the right source and to be able to validate the ERC takes time and experience. Now that we are aware of the tools and hazards needed to complete this task, let's transition and examine the steps of becoming proficient in understanding the ERC. Step 1. Understanding the history. In 2008, the Department of Defense published DoD Instruction 4001.01 Installation Support. This document instructed service components to establish a common delivery of installation support, also known as CDIS. This system would give the DoD a way to accurately measure the delivery of installation support. The CDIS would have to provide acquisition, management, resourcing, and delivery of installation support to advance the overall mission of the Department of Defense. Therefore, each service component was tasked to establish a Common Output Level Standards, or COLS. Each service component's COLS would use the best available business practices and operational risk management to efficiently and most effectively support the DoD component's mission and warfighting capabilities. Each service component went to work, and in 2010, the Air Force Common Output Level Standards program emerged. However, now 42 installation services needed a way to capture and report key performance indicators. The Fire Emergency Services Enterprise answered with the Emergency Response Capabilities Reporting Tool. The Air Force COL applies consistent and acceptable levels of standards and has a foundation that is comprised of three major goals, which are to provide a consistent way services were to be delivered across the Air Force, to provide standardized quality of life for airmen, and enable more accurate programming and budgeting. One might ask the question, if the Air Force has its COLS program, then why does the Fire Emergency Services need an ERC? At the time of the Air Force COLS inception, the Fire Emergency Service community really had no way to capture quality and consistent data across the fire emergency enterprise. Hard questions were being asked. On what does the hard-earned tax dollars get the base and return services? The questions were fragged and inconsistent, driving fire service leaders to develop the corrective solution. The decision had to be simple, yet detailed enough to provide valid data points to enable solid decision-making for trend analysis and forecasting. ERC was created to provide base-level leaders a simplistic tool to gather and report KPIs that would be captured consistently throughout the Fire Emergency Services community, which in turn would be rolled up into COLS for higher headquarters reporting. As mentioned in Step 2, the Emergency Response Capabilities Reporting Tool is a simple yet comprehensive tool derived from the career field source documents and federal mandated standards. The governing directives now task every fire department to report the same data points for their respective capabilities based off facts instead of assumptions. The ERC finally made it possible to capture consistent and accurate data for reporting to higher headquarters. The ERC is a tool executive fire officers need to understand at both the micro and the macro levels. At the micro level, the ERC captures data for fire departments to resource and justify funding and personnel requests. At the macro level, the roll-up of the ERC information provides leaders at the highest level the knowledge of the pulse and the health of the Fire Emergency Services enterprise. Now that we have an understanding of the history, the what, and the why of the ERC, let's learn about the interface of the ERC and how to enter data into it. When you open the ERC, you will be brought to the ERC's interface. The interface is a section of the reporting tool where all the source data is displayed after the respective calculations and variances have been applied. Let's quickly review the sections of the interface. First, the navigation buttons, which are located at the top left, are buttons that allow you to navigate throughout the reporting tool. First, clicking the Home button will always default you back to the Home interface. All the other navigation buttons have corresponding key performance indicators located in the lower sections of the screen. These sections enable those who are reviewing the ERC the quick ability to review the data without having to leave the interface. A few other important data points here are the overall department capability, which is directly tied with the level of service, also known as LOS. The legend provides quick reference to the breakdown of the LOS. In a moment, I'll provide a brief overview of what the LOS is. One quick note, however, drilling down into the LOS is not in the scope of this tutorial. Yet LOS is extremely important for the executive fire officer to understand, and therefore highly encouraged for them to study the source document, Air Force Instruction 32-2001. The ERC is expressed as Optimum Level of Service, OLS, Reduced Level of Service, RLS, Critical Level of Service, CLS, and Inadequate Level of Service, known as ILS. Optimum Level of Service is when all authorized resources are available for emergency response within the response time standards. OLS provides sufficient capability for quick response and sustained operations after the arrival of crews. With RLS, sufficient capability is provided for initial response, scene assessment, and implementation of mitigation tactics. This level of service represents increased risk and loss potential. Fire and emergency objectives may not be successful during situations where simultaneous rescue and firefighting activities are required. In critical levels of service, successful outcomes can only be expected when the incident can be quickly mitigated. Firefighters are expected to revert to defensive operations when the emergency cannot be quickly contained. In ILS, the property involved in the fire is expected to be completely destroyed. Our final step is understanding how to populate the ERC with data. We will first start off with the manpower section. In this section, you will load information concerning your personnel. You can see you have two columns, one for authorized and one for assigned personnel. We like to call these the spaces and the faces. The spaces is the authorized personnel which has already been identified in your flight's unit manpower document or UMD. The assigned personnel are the actual people you have in your unit. Once you have validated those numbers, you need to add the personnel that are on extended absence, such as temporary duty, leave, or school. Also, if you are lucky enough to get a temporary hire, then go ahead and populate that information as well. You can see that the program calculates the percentages for you at the bottom. An area of concern, and which is quite often missed, is the Air Force COLS portion located at the top right of the sheet. These numbers should match, but don't always due to personnel reductions. Let's move on to our next section, which is certifications. Within this sheet, you populate the personnel certifications within your flight. Personnel that are holding a position but are not certified would be marked as not certified. This is usually the case with personnel who are in upgrade training. Again, pay attention to the Air Force COLS section in the top right of the screen and validate that the numbers are correct. The vehicle sheet captures our aircraft firefighting capabilities as well as our structural. The big takeaway from this section is first make sure you have the correct vehicle set established based off the standards. When making the initial data load, ensure you are authorized the vehicles you have using the Vehicle Validation and Realignment Plan. The HALON section is used to track any HALON that might have been used. You can get this data from the Fire Prevention Office. The next section is the Hazmat Equipment section. This section is actually quite large and can take some time to validate. If the equipment is below the threshold of the required equipment, the sheet will change colors as you see here. Finally, the Personal Protective Equipment section. This recently just changed, and now we track any excess or shortages the fire department might have. Prior to this version of the ERC, only the self-contained breathing apparatus equipment was being tracked. Once all the data is loaded, you can return to the ERC interface to validate your final numbers. Next, click the Save Data button, which runs a macro to save the data to the historical data sheet. Review this sheet and see if everything looks good, and if it does, return to the interface. Now go to the top left corner and save the entire worksheet by clicking the disk or by clicking File, then clicking Save As. You have now saved your ERC accordingly. The data load is now complete. The ERC has calculated your capabilities and the numbers are ready to be transferred to the Air Force COLS reporting dashboard. This in turn will be rolled up and reported to higher headquarters. This concludes the lesson on the Emergency Response Capabilities Reporting Tool. Today we covered the history, the why, the what of the ERC, and then we reviewed the ERC's interface and how to populate the ERC with data. You now should have a good understanding of what the ERC is and how to use it. I hope you enjoyed this succession training segment. Thank you and have a wonderful day.